Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coffman Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas.
I'm speaking today with Sam Coffman. He's a former Special Forces medic and founder of the Human Path, also known as the Herbal Medics Academy. He wrote a book called Herbal Medic, which is in our college library, and I'll be honest, I got one myself in my own personal library. He's a clinical herbalist. He teaches wilderness first aid, wilderness first responder, as well as some advanced ALS level austere medicine, which originally piqued my interest. And he's based in Taos, New Mexico. Sam, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
So tell me a bit about your background.
Sure. So on the medical side, I was in the military twice, but on the medical side, I started out as a Special Forces medic after going through college and making some decisions as to what I was going to do. I kind of had a chunk of college time in between, my different times in the service in the U.S. Army. And the first time I was a 97 Echo interrogator and a German linguist. And then I came back in and I decided I wanted to learn medicine. I wanted to learn emergency medicine, and the idea of the Special Forces medicine, everything that was done within the military medicine concept just really intrigued me. I was into holistic medicine. I was into plant medicine long before that. I grew up in a very plant literate family, and I, had a situation during my Q course, during Go Lab portion of Q course, where I broke my thumb and I used herbal medicine and I got through it. That was it was kind of like my rite of passage into herbalism, to where I realized how effective herbalism could be in the field, under stress, under duress. If you know Goat Lab, it's 4 months of hell, or was back then. And the amount of physical stress put on my hands, especially that particular broken thumb joint, was immense. And yet I was able to do it because of herbs. And then from then on, I was just kind of like hit the ground running in terms of trying to integrate herbalism with orthodox medicine, and, raised a family, was on a team, for another 4 or 5 years, and even had teammates that would come to me all the time for herbal medicine, or their families for herbal medicine. They would come to me first before they would want to have anything to do with going to the clinic, to the doctor. It was easy to catch on. Even like we were on break on training or whatever, we'd go out and do like little plant walks. So it was something that caught on. There was a lot of kind of social acceptance around me from people that I would have expected there not to be. Of course, God forbid if our medical director had found out, I would have gotten an ass chewing, I'm sure, for all of that. But it was effective. The things I was doing, even though I didn't know a lot yet, I was teaching myself. I had a friend who was a botanist, and she was able to show me a lot about just the identification of plants. And I read just, like crazy. And I found a couple of really good books to this day that I still, look into sometimes, that really helped me a lot. I was able to see the effects, the empirical value of what I'm doing as a clinical herbalist. And that's where I think herbalism, that's where the rubber meets the road for herbal medicine, is that what is the empirical result of what we're doing? And if you look at, some of the longer lineages of herbal medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine, long before it became TCM, before Mao Zedong and before all of that happened. But still, if you go all the way back, you're going back sometimes a couple of thousand years of empirical medicine for a huge populace. And so if you could say, so I always said, look, if I've worked with 100 people for an upper respiratory tract infection with these particular herbs and this particular formula, and not even one formula, maybe 2 or 3 formulas given over time, and out of those 100 people, 80 of them, in follow-up say, yeah, man, it was amazing. Within a day, everything went away. That's empirical evidence that it's working to me. That's not anecdotal. That's empirical at that point. And for me, that's kind of the path that I've been on. So, I've had thousands and thousands of patients over the last 30 years. We have an outreach organization called Herbal Medics, where we actually go into places that are underserved, and we'll work with like 100 patients a day. I mean, that's kind of hallmark of our school, is that we're not an herb school, quote unquote, where, you spend 2 hours or 3 hours doing an intake, and then, from somebody who can afford, a lavish lifestyle, and you can tell them, okay, you got to go off gluten, you got to go off sugar, you got to go off dairy, you got to exercise 5 times a week. And they're going to, you do that to somebody who, they're just making enough money to get by at best, and they don't have any health insurance. You're never going to see them again. So, I kind of perfected this whole 15-minute intake thing, where my interns will do about 5 minutes, or my clinical students will do maybe 5 minutes of intake, and I'll rotate between, say, 3 tables So over the course of 45 minutes, I've got 10 minutes at each table. And if I can't figure out at least what's going on the outer layer of the onion and give you some sort of symptomatic relief, and I may know inside, there's more to this, of course. There's a source of what's going on here, but we can't get to that yet. So I'd rather treat those first few layers so that you come back in 2 weeks and say, whatever you did, it's working. What's next? And we can go down a couple more layers. And so I found, follow-up is really the key for successful clinical herbalism. And so that's kind of the model that I created, I feel like, through our programs. And then thankfully being able to work with doctors. A lot of doctors of functional medicine. We have 2 docs on our faculty, MDs, both of whom were in the military. Kyla was in for 10 years in the Army as a doc, and then got out, and she's a functional medicine doc. And then Steve Pearson was also started as an 18 Delta. He was about 10 years before I did. He was also a Special Forces medic, but he went the route of emergency medicine and then family practice, and has been in rural Utah for 40 years, And so meeting these docs, working with them, developing curriculum with them, and having this, again, kind of acceptance at the level of somebody who's at the top tier of what we would consider to be Western orthodox medicine has really culminated, I think, in just this huge movement towards being able to almost create a new, I won't say paradigm per se, but just a different way of looking at medicine, a different way of looking at how we can integrate medicine to be able to use, in this case, of two sides. There's more than two. There's many facets to how you look at the health of the human body, but at least two, and to be able to look at both of them and to be able to say, well, there's weaknesses here and there's weaknesses here. How can we reinforce all of, it's a safety net in a lot of ways. What we do with our outreach organization is a huge safety net for underserved communities. We've worked in Nicaragua, we've worked in Mexico, we've worked in Belize, we've worked in very rural West Virginia. We've worked on numerous Native American nations here in the United States, and people that sometimes don't even have running water. And in fact, we have an off-grid portion to what we do, like slow sand water filtration, off-grid solar things that we were able to do as well on that are part of medicine. Your food and the water and all the things that you need to be able to be healthy are part of that as well. But primarily, the root of what we do is our off-grid, clinics, our herbal clinics for underserved people with that outreach organization. So seeing it work, for 100 people a day and having feedback and having follow-up and seeing the results of that, again, on an empirical level, I think is what has shaped my kind of route in through how I formulate, how I work with herbs. And then, of course, now that I've got a Master of Science in acupuncture and oriental medicine, being able to pull in that aspect of it as well and look at some of these issues. Like a good example of this would be like endocrine and hormonal issues that happen that are almost an epidemic for, let's say, women in a perimenopausal age, of blood sugar issues and cortisol issues and thyroid, saying, well, I'll help, and jumping into it. And so all of these things where if you look at it from a Western pharmaceutical or certainly from a Western herbal perspective, which I can speak to, it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole where it's like, oh, you're going to hit this hormone and you're going to hit that, and then something else is going to pop up, as opposed to what TCM, I think, really gave me the ability to look at a different paradigm as to the whole body and what's out of balance, and how herbs are much better at pulling the body into some kind of balance. They're not curing anything as much as they're helping the body, help itself, cure itself. And so I think that is a huge, again, kind of place for safety net where we can catch a lot of stuff that slips through the cracks in pharmaceutical medicine.
And there's a lot of research behind it in TCM, in acupuncture, as well as herbs. So there's proof that this works. And the difficulty is having acupuncture, which has been around 5,000 years, and suddenly acupuncture has to be gauged by Western medicine. And that's what we have to work with. So that's all right. So let's plug this 5,000-year-old medicine into our paradigm. And guess what? It works. There's some things that work out there, some that don't, just like Western medicine. But yeah, you're dealing with science here. It makes sense to use herbs for certain ailments. It makes sense to use acupuncture for certain ailments. And there's a need for that.
And it's interesting because when I first started getting into working with what we would consider to be Chinese herbs, or even Ayurvedic, even Indian herbs, and I got into that not because I wanted to do that, but because when I go out and do research, the only place I could find actual valid research was from China or from Taiwan or from India, because you couldn't find anything in the U.S. back then. This is only maybe 15 years ago, or so, but you couldn't find that kind of research that was very available. And now it's different a little bit. But so I started looking to those herbs instead. So because of that, I started using a lot of herbs that are used in, for instance, Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, but using them from a Western perspective, because they would do research and find, oh, it's really interesting. This herb actually supports mitochondrial production in the mitochondria of the heart, or this herb actually helps repair myelin sheath. And so I started creating all these formulas for things like mitochondrial support, for things like, I call it neuroregeneration, but it's myelin sheath regeneration. And lo and behold, working with things like herpes family viruses, shingles or HSV1 or 2, start adding that into your herbal protocol, along with the things that are clearly antiviral, and prevent shedding, like Chaparral or a feverfew, start adding that in and repairing myelin sheath. And now I've got patients that are saying, I haven't had a shingles attack, or I haven't had an HSV1 or 2 in 2 years now since I started using this stuff, instead of it being every 3 months or whatever. So finding that information, like you said, and the research on it, and then applying it, in the clinic and seeing what happens has been, huge learning, kind of this whole learning gift, I think, that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years for me too.
Definitely. I remember reading in the Iliad that yarrow was used for wounds. And one anthropologist that I studied with was convinced that the whole Achilles myth of he can't die was based off the fact that they used yarrow as a styptic to stop the bleeding and to get the tissues to close. And that's why people thought he couldn't die, because he would fight during the day, get injured, and back then war was civilized, so the sun goes down and they stop fighting. It gives everyone a chance to use yarrow or something like that. And,
right.
And now, what do we know? There's science on PubMed stating yarrow is good for as a styptic, as a wound. And you mentioned antiviral. There's tons of herbs out there that have been proven to be antiviral. Oregon grape is a fantastic, good research behind that. And why not bring these into the 21st century?
Right. And so, like on those two herbs, for instance, starting with Oregon grape, the leaf, is one of the things of the plant, is one thing that came about. This is it's one of the older research around this, I would say, in terms of what plants can do to enhance, back to the integration, enhance pharmaceuticals from an antibacterial standpoint. The leaf contains a substance that's called MSC, or it's basically 5'-methoxyhydrocarbon, or MHC, that people just say for short. But this particular compound prevents the efflux pumping of for bacteria to be able to evolve and become resistant to drugs. So MDR pumps, in other words, we would call them. So in certain bacteria families have different types of MDR pumps. So, for instance, or efflux pumps, like NOR-A is one of the types that you find in MRSA. Well, they found that this, MHC from the Oregon grape leaf inhibits those pumps greatly. So it increases, for instance, the efficacy of berberine, which is one of the alkaloids that we find from the root of the Oregon grape. It increases the efficacy of that, something like 15 times. But in addition to that, you certainly could use that in conjunction with pharmaceutical antibiotics. And I've done this, not just with this, but many other plants where we're working with biofilms for things like C. diff infections. And literally, I've worked with patients that are a few days to a week away from surgery, on a C. diff problem that's been going on for weeks or even months, and start working with this. And, it's rare, because you got to find a doctor that's willing to work with their patient with you. So there has to be that communication. But, and this is even my own mother-in-law when she was alive, who had a lifetime of asthma, 80 years of asthma, and ended up with triple pneumonia. And, this was during COVID too, and had a wonderful respiratory doc who basically said, what you're doing is working, and I don't know what the hell it is, but keep doing it, and, keep her out of the hospital here, because we've gotten, she was in the hospital for like 6 months, with this, and everything was resistant. So there's that aspect, right? And then even like yarrow, as you mentioned, yarrow, named after, Achilles. The genus is Achillea, and normally the one we use, the species, is millefolium, so Achillea millefolium. And, this is a really interesting topic, because we talk about it like it's a styptic and a hemostatic, and it is, but it's also, considered a plant that may, if you look at plants to not take or herbs to not take before surgery, yarrow oftentimes is one of them, because it may enhance bleeding. It doesn't. But what I think that yarrow does more than even being a styptic or a hemostatic herb is it speeds up the inflammatory processes so that our inflammation cycle. So if we have wound healing, if we look at it from one of several different ways, we can look at it as hemostasis, inflammation, proliferation, and remodeling. As we get into from hemostasis into inflammation and into proliferation, how fast can we get through that inflammatory stage to where we're increasing the healing? So nitric oxide, for instance, if we have, capillary tears and so forth, or NO2 and then in enos, right, and endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the relationship between those to be able to repair those capillaries, to be able to repair the endothelium is incredibly important. And of course, weightlifters and athletes see that now. So now you can buy it didn't used to be this way back when I remember first started working with it. I had to tell people, no, nitric, not nitrous oxide. I'm talking about nitric oxide. Now it's everywhere, in GNC stores and stuff, because people are seeing how fast it helps with rebuilding muscle tissue and so forth. But that process is what I think we really gain from plants that we call anti-inflammatory, or even in the case of yarrow, we say it's styptic, but man, yarrow in a liniment that we apply topically for things like sprain, strain, soft tissue injury, even broken bones with a soft tissue injury around it, is phenomenal at speeding up that process and helping heal. And of course, reducing pain in the process.
So we're both former SF guys and passionate with this. Would there be a place in the 18 Delta course or at SOMA to teach the science-based of herbal medicine? Because these guys are going to be deployed. Yarrow grows everywhere. I've yet to be in a country that doesn't have a bit of rocky soil for the yarrow to grow. How would you put those two passions of yours together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually was approached by someone from, I don't remember now, it's been so long, I want to say fifth group, but somebody who, back in 10 years ago, about maybe coming up with a course that we could do that with. So in a time, I was really busy on combining wilderness first aid and wilderness first responder with herbal medicine. And then I realized those two worlds it's too early for those two worlds to merge. Right? I mean, WFA is WFA, WFR is WFA. Stabilize them, package them, and get them to higher care. And then so I thought, that's when I started working with Dr. Pearson, and we're like, we both were like, we need this extended field care, this prolonged field care kind of approach, this austere medicine approach. That used to be in the Special Forces medic doctrine closer back to the Vietnam War and post-Vietnam. But after the Iraq and Afghanistan situation, it kind of went out the window because there's still higher care so close. It isn't something that they were thinking about. And I think things are turning back to that now. I think. I don't keep up abreast on any of that. But the idea was, how can we move beyond? So let's have an intro, get them in WFA and WFR cert. And then we start our austere medicine program where we're doing a dumbed down, and that's a bad way to put it, but it's a kinder, gentler version of the 18 Delta Q course, even Goat Lab. Now we're not working with living tissue, but even with dead tissue that's pre-recent, because we have people that are preppers and that grow sheep and so forth, where we can do a harvest any way that they're doing maybe during a harvest, and we can have some tissue to work with for everything from sucking chest wound injuries and what they'll look like to to skulls and so forth, and working with that on a emergency level. And then what about the healing side of things? How are we going to be able to have this work faster for healing from trauma, from physical trauma? And then how about the acute side of care? Because as you mentioned earlier, the antiviral potential for herbs is just phenomenal. And so how often do you see that in the field too? Like if you're in a team in the field and you start catching some kind of a virus, or maybe I've even worked with leishmaniasis with the Rama Indians down in Nicaragua, where everybody has leishmaniasis scars, everybody. And I did a lot of research on it, went down there, and I got some amazing results working with topical and internal medicine with that tribe. And I had somebody down there who was an English speaker who she had married into the tribe. So I had contact with her about every 2 to 3 months when she'd go to town, and she'd just stay in town for a little while and have, internet. And yeah, everybody was like, we ran out of funding for it, but when are you guys coming back here? Because this stuff is working. So there's these kinds of, even tropical medicine where we can apply venom, snake bites, things like that. I've had amazing experiences working with rattlesnake bites with dogs, copperhead bites with humans, just working with things that are high uranidase inhibitors like echinacea and gustifolia. And so we have alkylamides in there that do that. We have compounds in many different herbs. Here again, a lot of this research comes to us from India because there's so much folk medicine for snake bites over there, and people are like, well, how's this stuff working? Because it's working. And so, I'm finding that we can have a better literacy and results with something like snake bites with herbs than we have with anti-venom, which is, I'm going way on a limb saying that. I know that, I realize that. But when we're talking about field and austere medicine, I think it's the best foot forward to be able to work with herbs that way. And I would love to be able to give back to the special operations, the special forces community, especially at some point. So I hope that happens.
We'll have to talk about that. I present every year at the conference, and it's definitely moving away from the GWAT into more of what we specialize in, unconventional warfare. And there are acupuncture courses. They're teaching ear acupuncture to medics, 18 deltas and 68 whiskeys, going through the 300 F1 course or whatever it's called now. So I think there is definitely a need for that. I've given herbal medicine talks to a few soft units here around the EU, and I think it's prime. I think we're ready at the current situation. We're going to be working maybe behind enemy lines, or and maybe the original SF mission of there's the 12 guys, that's it, and you need to resupply on your own. But I think you're getting a jump on this. So and you're doing this through the Herbal Medicine Academy. Tell me a bit about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I started this school. I started my original school, which was more of a survival, martial arts, and then herbal medicine. It was kind of like this trifecta thing that I had back in Manitou Springs 30 years ago. Didn't have the resources, and it didn't really take off at the time, which was fine. I had a family to raise, and then we moved to Texas from Colorado, and it just kind of felt, I actually got into med school in Texas, UTESCA, and just family and finances, I had to walk away. And then boom, all of a sudden this land dropped into my lap that ended up being our campus in the hill country north of San Antonio. And it was time to start the school for real that time. And that's where we've been. So that started out as the Human Path, which had an entire herbal medicine component to it. But the herbal medicine component just took off and grew larger than life, faster than we could keep up with almost. And because it was so confusing for a lot of students coming in strictly from the herbal medicine side, we created another website. So it's sort of like an affiliate website. It's the same company. It's Herbal Medics Academy versus the Human Path. You can get back and forth. They have almost the same logo, and it's very obvious that's what we do. But medicine is now the centerpiece of everything we do. And even in the austere program where I used to have all of these really cool, like scenario-based escape and survive type courses. I called them the urban core basic and the wilderness core basic. I put together scenarios that were crazy, that were real life kind of scenarios with actors and everything that would, just hype the adrenaline like crazy. But all of that really kind of wraps down to now a medical mission for me. So we've taken all of that and condensed into what we call the MAP course, which is a medical advanced party course, which is teaching everything from reconnaissance and even a little bit of fitness and self-defense to medical reconnaissance and epidemiology and understanding the community and language and all of the things that you need if you're going to go into a community that's in need. Find out what they need, not what you think they need, but what they really need. And then all of the ingress and egress security issues around everything to get our team in and out and make sure we can do that. That could be post-disaster. That can be here right in the U.S. That can be, we've been places where, even in the U.S. where security is definitely an issue. We've been in Nicaragua, obviously, in places where security is absolutely an issue. But that's not like, you're not going to have your medics walking around with guns. It's more understanding all of that information from a scout and a reconnaissance position. And then really, in my opinion, security and these kinds of things, it's 90% being forewarned and just understanding how you go in and what your attitude is and how you work with people. And you don't wear in a Rolex that's worth somebody's annual salary and leave it lying around. And, we do things to be able to fit in with the community and make sure that we have people that can help us do that too. And language, of course, is a big part of that too. So that's what it's all boiled down to. But in part of that, we still do some of the things I used to do. I would love to get back to that and winter survival and scout survival. And we have a great educator he's in chiropractic school right now, but he was in the Navy for 15 years and he's really been a part of that. So he's kind of taking that and developing it more since I don't have time and I'm running a clinic and running a school and writing books. I have a book, my publisher is waiting on me, tapping their toes. 2 days I have to turn in another manuscript of my next book, which is called Survival Gardening. And I have, all of this stuff going on, and I'm trying to get my board certification passed for New Mexico so I can have an acupuncture license here. For me, by the way, we were talking about acupuncture earlier. And if you go to Asia, acupuncture is probably 80% herbs and 20% needles. If you come to America, it's like 80% needles and maybe 20% herbs. And even in that 20%, in my opinion, most people don't really understand herbs very well. It's patent formulas. It's stuff that's encapsulated. Nobody understands what an herb even looks like, let alone how to make medicine from it. I have these multifractional techniques I use to be able to pull out the medicine from there. Even the medicine of taste and understanding how that integrates into it too. You just don't find that. So for me, that will continue. And because of that, you can't really you can't get insurance to pay for herbs. You can get them to pay for needles, but I'm with you on that. And I think it's always like whatever piece gets pulled out, like you were talking about battlefield acupuncture earlier, with the ears. And, there was a colonel that made that very much famous. And now it's a certification. Like I can get a battlefield acupuncture certified, and it's used for trauma, mental trauma and anxiety and PTSD and those kinds of things, and effective. And it certainly can be effective. But the jump from where we're at into herbal medicine is just a fantastically huge jump, because there's not really anybody like me using this stuff in a clinical capacity with the empirical information coming back that also understands and has a foot in Western orthodox medicine the way that I do. You can find doctors that are familiar with herbal medicine on the surface, the functional medicine doctors. I work with one, and she literally went through our HMP course, and after it's like a 1-semester course, and she's like, it's like going back to med school for me. I don't have time for this. You're my herbalist. I work with you, and you work with me. And so that's, that was our arrangement since then, and we worked together beautifully. But it's impossible, and the doctors can't. An NP or a DO or an MD, they have their standard of care that they have to follow. They can't just prescribe herbs. It's impossible unless they want to, get practicing outside the scope of their license, or they put on a totally different hat and do it. And even then, it's just not as effective. So it really has taken somebody, I think that's why I felt good about walking away from med school a few years later. It's like I needed to do this, because if I had gone through med school and I'd gotten my MD, I wouldn't be able to do any of the things I'm doing now. And it's important that this is one of those vacuums right now that somebody needs to fill in order for us to move forward as a medical society. And that can be special forces medicine is one place where I think it can absolutely come in and be effective and be accepted quickly, because when I was in SF anyway, it's what works. And I was telling you earlier, when I first started in the herbs and I was on a team, and I had my teammates and even other people in the company that would come up to me and be like, hey man, I need this for my kids, or I need this for myself. They'd come to me. I got this reputation. They'd start coming to me before they'd go to the clinic. And thankfully, as I mentioned to you, the medical director never found out about that, or I probably would have gotten an ass chewing. But I was effective. I mean, these things were working for people. And so it just caught on. Hey, I go to Sam, man. He'll square you away with the right herbs for that. And it's funny. My kids grew up the same way, to where their friends would come over and be like, hey, Dad, my friend's needs some herbs for this. She's starting to feel sick. And I'd be like, I can't do that without talking to their parents. I'm not just going to give them herbs. But my kids, it was such a normal part of life. We never went to the doctor. We never went unless there was, broken bone or an emergency or an infection that we just had to have antibiotics for, So it's a matter of getting that into the accepted kind of collective consciousness of the medical framework of the U.S. It's a big step. And I think we're a lot further than when I started this and had to look over my shoulder every 5 minutes to make sure, FDA or somebody else wasn't going to kick down my doors. But we still got a long ways to go.
Herbs is harder to push science, get science behind it. So acupuncture, at least what I've seen at Soma with the battlefield acupuncture, it's an if-then statement. If this, stick this thing in this ear. And that's just not how I learned 5-element acupuncture. You have to know, it's a whole medical system, isn't it? So it's a brand new way of looking at the meridian. I know there's no science behind the meridians, but I've definitely felt some tinges of electricity down the meridians when I've given acupuncture as well as taken acupuncture. So I can see why SOF and Western medicine jump on the acupuncture, because it's an if-then statement, and it's so much easier and quicker to learn than getting the nuances of herbs. In traditional China, I'm not talking about Maoist medicine, where I studied and acupuncture and herbs was from the 5-element Worsley, which is ancient, 5,000 years old. They believe that herbs is way more powerful than needles by far. And you do needles maybe first because it's easy, and if that just twinges them a bit. But if you want to hit something over the head, you give the herb. And in trying to learn that is a challenge. And I think that what impressed me with when I started looking into what you're doing is you're tackling that Herculean event of trying to bring in the herbal side. I mean, acupuncture side is easy. Everyone's doing it. There's science behind it, and the science behind herbs as well, but there's not enough. And in trying to bring that in with mainstream, I was really impressed with what you're doing on doing wilderness first aid, first responder, because there's tons of herbalists out there, and I've studied with a lot of them that are fantastic. Wildcraft herbalists. Karen Sherwood is probably the most profound woman I've worked with herbs. But she doesn't bring in Western side at all. It's just plants or go home. and she's amazing that way. And you're trying to balance this. And it's really impressive to see what you're doing and the challenge of that. I see that within your school, and I would welcome anyone listening to look at your programs. You have some online programs as well as classroom programs that will balance this. So And you have an austere medicine course. And that was, I think that was the thing that picked up your website, because we have a master's austere critical care. So I'm looking for austere critical care stuff, and boom, there it is. And I'm like, what? Oh, this guy's an SF. Who is this? And so I started looking into it, and I bought your book, and then I bought another one for the classroom. Tell me a bit more about your austere medicine course, and you have to be a wolfer to take it. So it's up at the EMT level, or what level are you looking at here?
Yeah, and we get students there. There's a bunch of prerequisites to come in. So we've changed things around, and so what we do is we have a whole lot. You're right, a lot of online, especially with COVID. We were already there and ahead of the competition in terms of online before COVID started, but COVID really gave us that boost to really pull everything into a really solid online format curriculum. So for the austere program, you've got to take the austere acute, the austere trauma, which are both 12-week programs, classes with myself and Steve Pearson. Steve has developed an incredible curriculum on both sides of those, and he's an amazing teacher. I love listening to every time I listen to Steve talk, I learn something. It's just, he's an incredible, he's just got so much experience, and he knows so much, and he's so open to other forms of healing. I mean, he's looked at ozone therapy, he's looked at so many other things, the stem cells, everything, but he started as an 18 Delta, and he came up through the whole emergency medicine stuff, and he's really good at it. So it's really cool to have somebody that's that balanced as my partner in crime here, teaching all of this stuff. So there's those two pieces. And then the MAP course I mentioned earlier, the Medical Advanced Party, emergency birth. We have a whole emergency birth program taught by a midwife, licensed midwife, and a nurse midwife. And the licensed midwife, Katia Lamone, is unbelievable. And she's as far as I know, the only person in the world who's established a midwife-only, midwife-run clinic in a hospital that isn't under anybody else's authority. Like, what they do is their own authority, and her goal has always been to try to really reduce like the ridiculous cesarean section rates in Mexico. She's in Mexico now and working with the clinic. So anyway, she teaches all of that, and as part of her program is emergency birth as well. And in fact, she wrote that chapter on it that's in my book. I wouldn't deign to write that chapter, myself. She's amazing. And on the herbal side as well for that. So this all kind of comes into this collective, all the things you got to do is these prerequisites. It's not insurmountable, but it's something it takes about maybe a year to complete to come to what we now call our home course, which is a 13-day on-site course, which is the Herbal Off-Grid Medical Experience. And that's taught by myself and Steve. So what we do is we split the class into two, and we go back and forth between, and there's 3 days of each of these. There's 3 days of the MAP where they're learning just how to recon and set up and be a camp and be a team together, how to cook their own food, how to plan their own meals. We have a little bit of, we've got some barter and trade going on with this community. You want some rabbits or some chicken or whatever it is you're going to prepare for food. We teach them all of that. We barter with them. They have the food. And so they kind of get into that, the whole thing of just team and field work and all of that to set up for the clinic. And now what are our reports from here? What are we going to find out? What is the clinic going to need to prepare for to treat the most in this environment? So that's the 3 days there. And then the next 3 days is the Wellness First Responder certification. So before they get there, they have to have taken the WFA and the AWFA, either online or on site. So they've already had like 48 hours of wilderness first aid and advanced wellness first aid instruction. Then they get the last of whatever, they get 72 hours, I guess, total in the WFR, and it's all hands-on, it's all scenario-based, lots of stuff, from multi-trauma casualty to multi-casualties to just basics, environmental and stuff like that. Of course, a little bit of course, CPR, AD, even though we know you can't use that stuff if you're from higher care. So nobody talks about like a precordial thump. It's like I talked to a cardiologist and like, yeah, if I couldn't get the health care, we can't give him CPR. That's what's left. He's like, and I remember I had a cardiologist friend and he's like, I've used that 3 or 4 times in an OR. It's like, it works, it can work. It don't want to work every time. But, why don't we teach that if you're going to really what are you going to do? Rig up a improvised stretcher and be given CPR trying to carry somebody over a trail for 10 miles, to get to higher care. So those kinds of things, we really try to work within the WFR in a first world USA, of course, to be within all the scope of that. But then from there, it's like, okay, now it's austere time. And so we do 3 days of austere trauma. So now that WFR turned into, we had this makeshift clinic that we're going to, wait for transport. Guess what? There's no transport. All the bridges are out. It's a post-disaster situation here. Until further notice, there is no higher care. We got these trauma situations we got to deal with, and now we move straight into austere trauma. And this is where Steve takes over, and they're working with headlamps into the night as teams, learning how to do the stuff that he works with. And so there's all kinds of. He gets into everything. He gets into everything that we got into in Goat Lab, debridement and amputations and sucking chest wounds. And he is the only person I'd ever heard talk about recycling your own blood, for blood transfusion. So from let's say we have a hemothorax and we're able to take that blood out. It's basically sterile blood, filter it and put it back in the body. And now I'm hearing other people, he's been talking about that since I've known him, which has been about 7 years. And now finally I'm hearing more and more people talk about this. I think Steve's one of those people who's ahead of his time as well. And then from there, we move into the acute care for the final 3 days, which is like, okay, now we got actual clinics with colds and flus and people that have chronic, they don't have their medication. I have heart medications and I'm out. I can't get to higher care. I'm having these heart palpitations, all that kind of stuff starts coming in there. And then we finish it off with a real life clinic that's an herbal clinic for an underserved community that we set up and boom and get it done. And it's like a half day because we run the clinic for maybe 2 hours, but set up with the breakdown and all of that. So it's basically a total of about 12 and a half days for that home portion of the austere. It's the first time we've run it up here, run it at all. Up until this point, we've always done them separately as 5-day intensives on site. Now we're compiling it all into one. And we weren't sure how it's going to go over, but the class is filling up and people are doing their prereqs that they need to. And so I think it's going to be a big success. All the curriculum's there. We got everything to do it. We just got to get the students to show up with the motivation. And I think we have that.
Yeah, good deal. So where do you see the school in 5 years?
More of this integration, further along, maybe hopefully some integration with special ops and special forces at some point, because I think that they're always ahead of their time. And so looking to that, to maybe that would be one way, entrance way into more credibility, I guess, with the medical, world that doesn't see credibility in anything without stepping through certain, gatekeepers, whether or not we agree with it. And then more integration here in the clinic, more, my clinic being really very thriving here. My wife is in nursing school right now. She's going to be within 3 years, she'll be an NP, and NPs here are autonomous. So she'll be able to step back into the clinic in that route, in that mode as well. And maybe Kyla has talked about maybe moving down here to New Mexico and partnering with me in the clinic. And then the school, just taking off. I'm working with Taos Search and Rescue, which I love those guys. There's a great vibe here. So doing a lot of stuff with them. And that's great because I can get my commo chops up now. And, I'm of course ham certified, but now I can work with that and work with that aspect, work with their medical aspect, start helping to train them, in the WFA, WFR type stuff. They already have that, but it's kind of old school and it seems like it's, they need some new energy in it. And so I'm hopefully helping with that. We're also plugging in, hopefully my wife is plugging in a bit already with some of the native communities here that I think are, of course, very open and very accepting. She's worked with the council in Arizona, and we have some stuff lined up this year to be able to teach both WFA as well as herbal medicine to some of the different tribes in Arizona. And so that helps us on that side of being able to reach out and give back to communities, of course, as well, as much as we can, especially communities that are in need.
Full circle, isn't it? So you look at the traditional herbalist from 400 years ago before they were kind of stopped from doing that. And now you're reintroducing that into their own society. That's really impressive.
I'm happy to hopefully see that happen. And I think it has to happen from the way that I think it has to happen in the way that it's happening in order to be successful and to have endurance, to make it in the world we live in today. So, yeah.
So the last question I have is 3 herbs. You have 3 herbs that you get to choose to bring with you as an austere medic, remote medic. What would you bring?
God, that's a really tough question to only have 3 herbs. When we first started doing our stuff, and it was Nicaragua was the first place we went on the West Coast, into some remote places we had to walk into. And I pared it down to 40 herbs plus like maybe 8 or 9 pre-made formulas, and was able to do that. And now it's like doing a clinic. I want to have 100 herbs or so with me. It's like, that's about what I feel like I can really use. But 3 herbs. Yeah. So what would we do? Well, of course, it depends on what you're expecting to be your problems. Most of all, if you know you're going to be just walking into an area besieged with upper respiratory tract infections or with urine. I mean, in Nicaragua, literally something like 80% of the men have urinary tract infections or kidney stones or some issue around that. I mean, that's documented by Nicaragua as well, from working in the sugarcane fields, toxic water, bare feet, and just, and horrible drinking water in the first place. And so is that where you're going? And, so obviously that plays a role. But if I didn't know that, it was just like put a blindfold on and you got to take 3. I would probably take some berberine containing herb. In other words, algarita or common barberry, or I don't like working with golden seal, so I'll leave that one out of it. But like Chinese coptis, any of the barberries, any of the Berberideaceae or the berberis, or we mentioned earlier Oregon grape, which is the Mahonia species. Any of those species would be one of them. Another would be, and the whole plant, especially if you use the whole plant, I guess kind of cheat and be able to use the leaf as well as the root would help. If you can just take the plant. But and then I think any kind of a mucosal vulnerary, in other words, an herb that helps support the mucosa, but also helps stimulate usually submucosal lymph and immune. So like marshmallow root is probably my default for that. Marshmallow root and leaf together, or just the root itself. And that could be common mallow too. That doesn't have to be marshmallow. It could be common mallow, which grows in every single crack and every sidewalk, in U.S. It's that little round leaf that you've seen over and over again. That's our common mallow. Third maybe would be, I don't know, maybe echinacea. Like if I could cheat and mix the purpurea tops and the echinacea and angustifolia root into one mix, which I normally do anyway, take that. That gives us a good, again, really good kind of general immune stimulation. And between that and the berberine and the mucosal vulnerary, we can cover some different body systems, okay, gut, respiratory, possibly urinary tract to some extent. If I wasn't going to take echinacea, I think I'd choose gumweed or grindelia, because that's great for both the inflammation of the respiratory tract and the urinary tract too. So, try to map things that cross across, the mucosa of the whole body, anywhere it is on the inside of the body, and different body systems.
That's a challenge, and you came up with 3. That's pretty impressive. Well, Sam, it's been an honor to have you on the program. For any of you listening, in the show notes, we'll have information on Sam and what he's doing with the Herbal Medicine Academy, how you can get involved, and a link to his book, which if it's not in your library, you are losing cool points. It has both Western medicine and the herbal side of things. So it's the best I've seen that combines that. And if you want to get in touch with Sam, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Honestly, if you need to get a hold of me, email. And it's just my last name first name at Gmail. So Coffman.Sam. So COFFMAN.Sam@gmail.com is my personal email. And that works better than anything if you need to get in touch with me.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been an honor. Really nice talking to an SF brother as well. And thank you.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine Foundation. If you would like to earn CPD credit for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credits, free access to the virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on the college website, which is Corum, Corom, Corum.org.